of how is that podcast going to generate like a 10x ROI, and not just in terms of money, but in terms of energy. Does your podcast give you energy, or does it just suck your energy?
So when you're working with somebody, if you're talking to them about starting a podcast or doing something like that, one, what was your own growth curve so that you can mirror what you would tell somebody?
So my own growth curve, we maxed out the number of episodes that we could do and then had to back off. And I think that's part of what a lot of people do that gets them into trouble. And so I've made that mistake and then course corrected and just stayed in the game, right? But like I said, we were doing 3 episodes a week at one point, all with guests. You know, at first we tried mini episodes. I couldn't keep my co-host under 45 minutes to save my life, so they ended up being full-length episodes. And what I realized is that a lot of people that, you know, there's different reasons for burnout and people quitting their podcast, but I see this a lot where people get enthusiastic about it and they gorge themselves on the interviews. Like, oh man, I can talk to all these people. And then they load up 20 on their calendar for the next 2 or 3 weeks. And then they burn out. So I think and there's a bigger principle here. One of my mentors said this to me one time, because like a lot of people, you just have harsh inner critic, right? You just always got that inner commentary running, telling you they're not working hard enough, growing fast enough, and all that stuff. And he said, look, man, doing your best is not maxing out and squeezing every last productivity of this day. So doing your best is doing today what is sustainable over the long run. Can you do what you did today every day? Can you do what you did today on the day when you don't feel like it, when you're at your lowest energy level, right? He's all about, like my mentor's all about kind of having a performance floor, not a ceiling. You have a floor that you never drop below. And I think I look at that same thing with podcasting, which is why we literally do not allow clients to publish more than 1 episode a week, right? Because that's a sustainable tempo. Just give me an hour a week. That's all I want from you. 1 hour a week. Don't do more. Don't do 5 interviews a week. Just do 1 a week, and we will publish it. Because there's people that if I left them to their own devices, they would gorge themselves on interviews, and then they'd burn out, or they want to do 3 episodes a week, thinking that would grow their audience faster, and then they'd realize they're burned out on it, and then they want to quit the podcast. So I think that, like I said, the bigger principle there is think about what you can commit to that's sustainable, and commit 100% to that, but then don't go over that. Because you're going to hit that point where you don't have the energy and it's all you can do just to do that hour a week because you got other stuff going on in life. Commit to only what's sustainable.
Awesome. I like that advice.
So now we only do, by the way, I take my own advice. I do my podcast once a week. My real estate podcast is once a week. You know what I'm saying? Like I do eat what I put out there.
That's good. Have you ever seen, so this is another thing that I feel happens, just like they start the podcast on, let's call it how to cook cupcakes, right? How to bake amazing cupcakes. Take the cupcake podcast and they start it and they're really excited. And then, I don't know, 2 months in, 3 months in, 4 months in, they're like, I'm over the cupcakes. Or I'm running out of people to talk to about cupcakes, or
right.
I mean, we see this a lot, like people's direction changes. How do you handle that as an agency? Like, how do you keep them on track? How do you keep them going down the straight and narrow and like keep producing content? Because the idea is you're going to do this for at least a year.
Yeah.
Before you're going to see any kind of traction.
18 months before you really see audience growth. But in the meantime, you can be building JV relationships, strategic referral partners. There's a lot you can do in those first 18 months to get a lot of mileage out of it as your audience, kind of builds and you lay that foundation. It's an interesting thing. You're always going to be tempted to pivot. The way that we keep clients on track is by bringing them back to the vision of why they started that podcast to begin with and how the return on time and energy comes back to them. So I've got a client that she's putting her podcast on hold. And the reason is because when she started the podcast, she wanted more agency clients. She wanted more high ticket clients, right? Well, she started getting them to the point where she's full. So then she started using the podcast to just kind of have conversations about whatever, and started to stray from the purpose of the podcast. And I could see this coming a mile away. Like I knew this was going to happen. And so it led to like a overabundance of interviews, kind of just talking about whatever. And she wasn't seeing the return come back in terms of clients because she stopped talking about the things that bring in clients.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think when certain things like that happen, you can always trace it back to getting away from the vision of why you started the podcast. You've got to have a crystal clear vision of how is that podcast going to generate like a 10x ROI, and not just in terms of money, but in terms of energy. Does your podcast give you energy, or does it just suck your energy, right? Because if it's just an energy drain, you'll do it for a while as long as it's bringing in sales. But if you enjoy it for its own sake, on top of it generating sales, is going to be way more sustainable. So I tend to only work with people that have like we were talking about before we hit record, just the people that have done interviews, that have been interviewed. They tend to be better clients. They tend to be more tuned into the podcasting world. And I tend to serve those clients better because they just enjoy podcasting. So, what I'm saying? So yes, you want the sales to roll in. Yes, you want that ROI in terms of income, but you also want it to give you energy and enjoyment, So the people that get energy and enjoyment out of it tend to last longer.
Awesome. I think that is true. I think having a crystal clear vision at the beginning, even if, as long as it's a broad scope that they can constantly recommit to, I think that is very, very good. I mean, that's when I started this podcast. My last podcast was very niche, and that's what happened. I eventually got to the point I was like, I'm not really focusing on this anymore. It isn't my thing. So when I started this one, I was like, I want it to be broad enough that I can always find enjoyment in talking around these talking points and finding interesting people to bring on, because I love the interview process. I love going through it. I love learning about people. So I think that is a very, very big
it's an interesting thing, that the niche, the super niche versus the broad enough. And it's tough to find that mix of a podcast that's broad enough to where it'll always hold your interest for the next several years, but niche enough that people understand instantly that it's for them right now in this moment. And that's sometimes where you just have to choose, and you have to go, this brand may take a little bit longer to build. I'm going to go a little bit more vague, a little bit more broad, maybe a little bit more branded. And it's going to be a little bit less clear what problem it solves right now, right this second for, my ideal client. But I'm going to take 3 years to build this thing. You know what I'm saying? And that's I think you can go either way, but maybe in the end that ends up building you a podcast that you enjoy more and that ends up lasting. So yeah, I think that and this is part of why we work so like deeply, and I really dig deeply into my clients' belief systems and their goals when they work with us in the agency, is because we want to uncover as much of that stuff as we can in the first few weeks of working together so that we make really good decisions on why their show is branded the way it is, what's the strategy, and how is it bringing return to them. Because if you get off on the wrong foot, you'll end up with a podcast that 8 episodes in, you're like, well, this is not giving me what I want. So that's my perspective on it, is dig in as much as you can and create that vision as clearly as you can.